Today is October 14th, 2020, and the 2020 presidential election is just under 3 weeks away. That's right, just 20 more days until we finally start seeing results come in for this presidential election. We can finally start seeing in just a couple weeks whether Donald Trump can make a comeback or whether Joe Biden can keep up his massive lead against Trump. I wanted to make this video because I was just looking on 538.com today at their election projection model. I've referenced this model so many times in my videos, in my previous videos, but I looked on there earlier this morning and I was really surprised at what I saw with the state that's on screen right now, the state of Georgia. When I went onto the website, I actually saw that Biden was beating Trump in the state of Georgia in terms of their chance of winning that state. You can see on screen right now, as of now, both have literally a 50-50 shot of winning the state. It's perfectly split down the middle. Trump has a 50% chance and Biden has a 50% chance of winning the state. But just earlier today, Biden was ahead of Trump by oh so slight of a margin. It was really, really small of a margin, but Biden was just edging out a win against Trump in this projection model. It says something like Biden 51%, Trump 50%, which obviously doesn't make sense mathematically, but nonetheless, it showed Biden ahead of Trump in the state of Georgia, which I thought was absolutely insane because the state of Georgia, it has not voted for a Democrat in the presidential elections since 1992 when it voted for Bill Clinton against George H.W. Bush. But ever since 1992, Georgia has voted for a Republican in every single presidential election since, and has almost solely voted for Republicans at the state level with their senators and their governors. In 2018, the gubernatorial election with Brian Kemp versus Stacey Abrams, and in that election, Brian Kemp barely edged out a win against Stacey Abrams. It was around a percentage point, if not less than that. Stacey Abrams ran a notably well campaign. She was able to get lots of people to turn out who normally wouldn't turn out and vote for her. But in the end, Brian Kemp just edged out a win against Stacey Abrams. Because Georgia overall is a more conservative state. It is a state that has consistently voted for Republicans, like I said, but here's the thing, here's the kicker. Kind of like Texas, a lot like Texas, in fact, which I talked about around a month ago in a previous video. It has been moving consistently towards the left, towards the Democrats in the past few years. And you can see that with the fact that in 2018, they almost voted for a Democrat as their governor. And you can also look at the 2016 election results compared to the 2012 presidential election results. If you look at the state of Georgia specifically, in 2016, Georgia was won by Donald Trump by a smaller margin than Mitt Romney won that state in 2012. Even though in 2012 Obama won and in 2016 Trump won, which means that the Republicans as a whole did much better in 2016 than 2012. Despite Republicans doing better in 2016, Georgia still trended towards the left despite the overall trend towards the right, which means that between 2012 and 2016, Georgia became quite a bit more liberal, quite a bit more democratic, because if it were staying the same, if it were just following the nationwide trends, it would have moved more to the right between 2012 and 2016. But because there was a big shift or a notable shift to the left towards the Democrats, you can see that despite Trump winning the election in 2016, Georgia moved to the left in that presidential election compared to 2012. So you can just see, looking at the data, that Georgia has been moving more and more towards the Democrats in the past few years. And I never thought that I would say this, but 2020 has a chance of finally giving Georgia to the Democrats. If you had asked me if Georgia was going to the Democrats at the beginning of this year, I would have said, hell no, not a chance. It looked like 100% safe state for Republicans. It's kind of like Texas. I thought there was no chance. I was aware that it was moving more towards the left, but I still thought that it was a 100% safe bet for Republicans, Georgia and Texas. But both of these states actually have a chance of going towards Joe Biden in this presidential election. And the big reason for this, the reason why that's the case, if this was a normal presidential election, then Georgia and Texas would both easily go towards the Republicans, I would think. But there was a pandemic this year. There was lots of social unrest across the country this year. There were all sorts of different crises this year, and the truth is, a lot of people are fed up with Donald Trump. A lot of people don't think he handled the any of these crises well. He was not good in his rhetoric. His rhetoric was too divisive. He was good at appealing to his base, but you cannot win an election only by appealing to your base because your base is only going to be made up of 30 to 40% of the electorate, but you need 51% of the electorate to win an election. So you also have to be able to appeal to people that aren't just in your base, that aren't just strongly, already strongly uh, supporting you. So I think Trump failed at doing that. In 2016, his strategy was pretty spot on. Even though it looked like a lot of people were saying that it would be an easy win for Hillary Clinton, I think one thing they were ignoring in 2020 was Trump's rhetoric. Even though in 2016 he was also being divisive, he was able to employ a really good rhetoric that hit Hillary Clinton on several key issues. He called out Hillary Clinton for a lot of her different Senate votes, for example, her supporting the Iraq War. And Donald Trump overall seemed a lot more like an outsider because he was speaking out against special interests, he was speaking out against corruption. Those sorts of things are the reason why Donald Trump won the 2016 presidential election because he was able to appeal to his base, but he was also able to appeal to disaffected voters, especially those in the Rust Belt. And those are the states that helped him win that election. But in 2020, even if you ignore the polls, Trump has not been doing well in his rhetoric because his rhetoric now only appeals to his base, but no one else. So you cannot win an election with only your base. You cannot win an election with only 40-ish percentage of the population. And this is by the way why you never see a major presidential candidate in a presidential election get below 40% of the votes because no matter how bad a presidential candidate is in either political party, 40% of the population is always going to back that candidate because in their eyes, that candidate, no matter what kind of scandal pops up, that candidate is still the lesser of two evils. That's kind of how our, especially at the presidential level, that's kind of how our election system runs in the United States. It's a matter of the lesser of two evils. Trump is not doing well in this election because he's only appealed to his base, and Joe Biden is basically able to suck up the entire moderate population, the entire moderate slash disaffected population of the country. And because of this, I'm expecting the Rust Belt, the entire Rust Belt, to flip right back to the Democrats, to Joe Biden. And it's honestly at the point where I can realistically conceive Ohio voting for Biden, even though Trump won it by an 8 point margin. I can realistically see it going right back towards Biden. The thing about Ohio is that the presidential election winners, there hasn't been a presidential election winner who has won without winning Ohio since 1960s. Every single president has won the state of Ohio since the 1960 election. So 1964 onwards, every single presidential election winner has won the state of Ohio. This is why Ohio is often considered the bellwether state because literally in every election since the 60s, Ohio has determined the winner of the presidential election. If Ohio votes for a Republican, that's who becomes president. If Ohio votes for a Democrat, that's who becomes president. So it's considered the bellwether state. And I was thinking that in this specific election, this might be the first election in over 50 years where Ohio votes for a Republican, but the winner is a Democrat. Ohio votes for the losing presidential candidate, but it actually might happen where Ohio votes for Biden now. Even though I thought it was a safely Republican state, it looks like in the polls that Biden actually has a decent chance of winning this. I still think Trump has a slightly better chance of winning, and in my presidential election prediction videos, I've still put Ohio in the Trump category, but keep in mind, there's definitely a chance of Ohio going to Biden. And if that happens, you can say goodbye to a second term of Trump. Republicans need Ohio to win. Ohio is a crucial state for Republicans. So, Republicans, honestly, are not doing well in terms of electoral college strategy because a lot of states they are losing to the Democrats. A lot of states are going more and more towards the Democrats. In 2016, they were able to get surprise victories in the Rust Belt, but that does not make up for the fact that you have states like Texas, Georgia, Arizona, and arguably even the Carolinas, North and South Carolina, trending more and more towards the Democrats, more and more towards the left. And the Rust Belt is not enough to make up for losing all those southern states. When you have states like Texas with 38 electoral votes, states with Georgia with around 20 electoral votes, and Arizona, which also has quite a few electoral votes, you can't afford to give up all of that just by winning the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt is not enough to make up for that loss. So I think what the Republicans will have to do from now on is they're going to have to rethink their electoral strategy. They're going to have to rethink their presidential election strategy from 2024 onwards. They have a few choices. One, they can move more towards the left, maybe on social issues. Their second option, I would think, is they can try to be more like the Donald Trump type of figure, but actually hone in onto that and have the same kind of rhetoric. Because what happened with Trump is he originally had that rhetoric that got him to win, that anti-establishment rhetoric, I would call it. He originally had that in 2016, and he was able to win off of that, but he basically completely abandoned that this election cycle because that's not his main focus. His main focus has been, in terms of his rhetoric, his main focus has been the riots in cities like Portland, and his main focus has also been calling the Democrats, calling Joe Biden a socialist candidate. His strategy is to try to portray Joe Biden as a socialist and a far left figure who supports Antifa and the riots that are going on in these cities, which I think is a much less effective strategy than what Trump did in 2016. And I think you'll easily see that in the presidential election that's coming up. I think what Donald Trump could have done to still win this election was one, handle COVID better. I know that's not an easy task, much easier said than done, but the United States has objectively done really badly in terms of this pandemic. We have like 4% of the population, but around 20% of the world's COVID cases. So I guess he could have handled that better. Not an easy task, I completely understand. But number two, he should have probably honed in more on his 2016 rhetoric instead of going towards the anti-socialist rhetoric, anti-riot rhetoric. I feel like his 2016 rhetoric was a lot more effective at getting disaffected centrist voters to turn out for him. Number three, I feel like he could have also done better in the first debate, and he shouldn't have canceled the second and third debate. Actually, the third debate is still on, but he canceled the second debate because he didn't like the online format. If I were him, I would have totally just went on with it. I wouldn't really care if it was online or in person. Doesn't really make a difference in my opinion. So I would have used every opportunity when you're that far down in the polls. I would use every opportunity to try to make the comeback. In 2016, the debates were one of the biggest reasons why he won that election. So 2020, I feel like he could have used those debates to his advantage, but he failed to do so. And that is one of the reasons why he's not able to make that comeback that he did in 2016. You guys might remember in 2016, a month before the election, Donald Trump was down by many points in the polls, but I think the debates helped him to close the gap against Clinton. But there's no debate. There was one debate. There's going to be another, but I don't think Donald Trump's going to do well in this debate either. He kept interrupting Joe Biden in the first debate. I admit Joe Biden also did the same to Trump, but Donald Trump kept interrupting Joe Biden, and he wasn't really able to hit him on the same kinds of points that he hit Clinton in 2016. So I think that the debates won't really help him out much, if at all. In the first debate, it was basically a split between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and whenever there's a split between the debates where it's not clear who won that debate, the default winner of the debate is the one who's already doing well in the polls. So Joe Biden was already up against Trump in the polls. The debates did nothing to change that, so Joe Biden's the default winner of the debates. So Donald Trump is going to need a really big miracle in order to change that trend around. He is down by Donald Trump is down by almost 10 whole points in the nationwide polls, which is really hard to overcome less than 3 weeks before the election. If I were Donald Trump, I would just pray right now. Pray that you can have a 2016 comeback on steroids, because that's actually what he needs right now. 2016 comeback on steroids. In 2016, he only had to make up like a 4 to 5 point gap, but now the gap is twice as much as that. 10-point gap approximately. He's going to need a 2016 comeback on steroids if he wants to win this election.